Hello everybody and welcome to From Poverty to Progress, the channel that promotes an awareness and understanding of human material progress. My name is Michael Magoon. I am the author of the From Poverty to Progress book series. The first book in my book series is entitled From Poverty to Progress, and it explains the origin and causes of modern progress. My second book, which I am happy to announce is now available on pre-release, is called Promoting Progress, a radical new agenda to create abundance for all. I take the lessons learned from the theories in the first book and apply a concrete progress-based reform agenda to promote widely shared economic growth for all. And stay tuned to the end of this video for a free book giveaway. Today's episode is about understanding the ideologies of the left. First, I want to start with the left's view of progress. The ideological left typically compares today's society to an ideological vision of what society should be. In general, people who are on the left believe that people of good intentions must use the power of government to create a more just society, including increased spending on social programs such as education, medical care, pensions, and poverty reliefs, regulations to constrain selfish behavior of the wealthy and corporations, taxes on the wealthy, expansion of government-protected rights, and on educating people, particularly young people, as to the injustices and inequalities in society and the necessities of fighting against them. Now, I would argue that the left's worldview is very Hegelian, from the political philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And he's one of the most influential German philosophers of all time, and he's known for what's called idealism. Idealists believe that ideas are the driving force in change of the world. The left believes that people with good intentions embrace ideologies of the left. Then those people engage in political activity. That activity results in a change in government policy, and the new policy creates a better world. When most people on the left are in favor of progress, this is what they mean. Now, the left typically compares today's society to an ideological vision of what they believe society should be. They believe that society should be wealthy, equal, and free. But in real societies, many people are poor, there are widespread inequalities, and individuals are seriously constrained in what they can do. So how does the left explain this gap between what society is and what society should be? Typically, those on the left believe explicitly or implicitly that somebody did something bad to those who have less wealth, less income, less social status, and less freedom. In other words, the reason why people are doing poorly is because other people did bad things to them. And it's not just one person who does something bad, but a whole group of people. So, from the left's perspective, there's a tendency to divide society into those who did the bad things and those who received the bad things. But when you unpack the ideas on the left, I think there are some critical assumptions that come about that aren't so obvious. One is what I would call dualism. Pretty much all ideologies on the left and some on the right tend to divide society into two big groups. For the sake of this discussion, let's call them the oppressors and the oppressed. In general, the left is hostile to the oppressors and wants to take government action against them. And the left is sympathetic towards the oppressed and wants to take government action to help them. Now, which demographic groups actually fit into each one of these two groups is constantly changing. But those intellectual categories remain the same for virtually all ideologies on the left. These dualist beliefs are not new. In fact, they come from what sociologists call conflict theories. Conflict theories were invented by Karl Marx in the mid-19th century. Karl Marx believed that zero-sum class struggle is central to human history. In capitalist societies, it is a struggle between the bourgeoisie, who are the factory owners, and the proletariat, who are the working class. And if you don't believe me, Look at the very first lines in Chapter 1 of the Communist Manifesto. The history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. Free men and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on in an uninterested, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. This is the core of what Marxism, and I believe pretty much all ideologies on the left, are about. Now let me give you some examples of this dualistic thinking on the left. We already mentioned in Marxism, it's the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. Within social democrats and New Dealers, it was typically corporations versus workers. Within syndicalism, it's corporations versus trade unions. Or in left populism or Jacobins, it was the rich versus the poor. In Chicano ideology, it was Americans versus Hispanics. In third worldism, it is the Europeans versus indigenous peoples. In the American Indian movement, it was Americans versus Native Americans. In agrarian populism and Maoism, it's the landowners versus the peasants. In the black nationalism, it's black versus white. Environmentalists, well, here it's a little different, but I believe it is humans versus the environment. In feminism, it's men versus women. In the gay rights movement, it's straight versus gay. And in queer theory, it's cis versus trans. In each one of these ideologies, at their core is a dualist belief in the oppressed versus the oppressors. Now, dualism is not exclusively on the left. For example, in National Socialism, it's the Aryans versus the Jews. In fascism and nativism, it's the nation versus foreigners. And in anarchists and populists, it's the government versus the people. But there are some intrinsic problems with dualism. First of all, most of the activists who are on the left come from privileged families and are therefore, by their own definitions, members of the oppressor group. Most of the members of the oppressed group also do not agree with those activists. Some members of the oppressed group openly express ideas that match those of the oppressor group. And there is no evidence that the oppressed will voluntarily undertake revolutionary action without leadership from others. So all this leads to fundamental problems with the whole dualist belief system. So what is to be done? Now, Karl Marx believed that based on the inherent dynamics of capitalism, the proletariat would gain class consciousness and become revolutionary and overthrow the government and society to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat. By around 1900, it became very clear that was not going to happen. And in fact, if you look deeply into the way the left thinks, it's clear that there actually are three groups. Though the left doesn't vocalize it, the left clearly also has a third group in mind. It's not just the oppressors, and it's not just the oppressed. There's also a third group, which I would call the saviors. In other words, themselves. They place people who uphold left-wing ideology, even though demographically they're overwhelmingly belong in the oppressors group. In the way that they think, they perceive themselves as saviors. Now, where did this all come from? I believe it came from What Is to Be Done, a very influential book written by Vladimir Lenin in 1902. Lenin realized that Karl Marx was wrong. The proletariat would not naturally become revolutionary, as Marx claimed. To solve the problem, Lenin created the concept of a vanguard. And this is one of the most important changes in left-wing ideology in the entire history of the left. The vanguard was a small, dedicated group of revolutionaries who would agitate on behalf of the proletariat, seize power, and establish a dictatorship of the proletariat. The dictatorship would not be of the proletariat. It would be on behalf of the proletariat. The dictatorship would actually be by the vanguard itself. Ironically, Vladimir Lenin explicitly admits that he was working against the actual beliefs of the proletariat. What Lenin actually created was this concept of what I call the savior. The problem is that the saviors are typically, from outward appearances, members of the oppressor group, but they distinguish themselves from oppressors by their good intentions, of which the oppressors have bad intentions. The saviors use specific terminology in their speech and writing, and they show their dedication to political activity. In this way, the saviors distinguish themselves from the oppressor group, and this self-perception of activists as saviors is central to their entire moral identity. And because, based on outward appearances, they're obviously members of the oppressor groups, they must continually distinguish themselves from the oppressors, particularly in their speech and writing. All ideologies on the left, and some ideologies on the right, have an implicit assumption that people who embrace their ideology become saviors, people who struggle to save the oppressed, even if the oppressed do not want to be saved. And this is an important concept in Marx's ideology of false consciousness, that Karl Marx and particularly Lenin believed that the actual beliefs of the proletariat are false, that the true beliefs of the proletariat are expressed by the revolutionary vanguard. So what we see is the oppressed groups aren't actually people. They're really a concept to be struggled for. And that concept becomes increasingly detached from real people. Because the oppressed cannot see their own group interests, the saviors must undertake political action on their behalf. All bad actions or beliefs by the oppressed are ignored or rationalized as itself the result of their oppression. And all members of the oppressed group who voices ideas similar to the oppressors are a fundamental threat to their own worldview. So it becomes necessary for the saviors to enforce ideological rigidity on the oppressed themselves, because the oppressed don't understand what is good for them. And what I find interesting about ideologies of the left is that these two or three groups have stayed constant throughout leftist ideology, even though we've had so many ideologies on the left come and go over the last 200 years. So from one sense, they've been very inconsistent because they're constantly changing. But from another sense, they're extremely consistent over time in how they view the world. The way that the ideologies on the left have changed over time is mainly on which demographic groups matter most in terms of who's oppressor and oppressed, and the proper means to achieve their goal of the final liberation. Very little change has been made in the ultimate goal of the left. Now, I find that the left believes that they understand the right, but in fact, I don't think they really do. And there's a lot of evidence of this. Those on the left tend to view those on the right as someone who's uninformed, uncaring, unintelligent, and or having been corrupted by money from powerful interests. People on the left have a very hard time understanding conservative views as they exist themselves. They think that there's something deeper going on, and that the conservatives are essentially not telling the truth about what they're actually trying to do. The left feels that their worldview is so self-evident and beyond discussion that the conservatives must not actually believe what they're saying. And because the right and moderates are uninformed, uncaring, unintelligent, or have been corrupted by money from the powerful interests, the only reasonable discussions are within the worldview of the left. Now we can already see that that leads in some very dangerous directions. Now I believe there are some fundamental differences between the left. All ideologies on the left tend to agree on the goal, but they have serious disagreements on the means to get there. The center left wants to work within liberal, democratic capitalism. In other words, they want to reform in the direction of social justice. Whereas on the left wing, they tend to believe that the goals of social justice justify more radical action outside the confines of liberal democratic capitalism, and in fact attempt to abolish it. I believe that a key weakness of the left is that they focus so much on good intentions and don't focus on results. After all, it's results that matter because it's results that actually affect people. Too many people on the left, I believe, assume that good intentions always lead to the same ideology. In other words, ideologies of the left. And you can identify people's good intentions by their stated beliefs and their terminology. This leads to circular arguments, or people on the left assume that anyone who disagrees with them can't possibly have good intentions. And even worse, they assume that good intentions lead to good results. And this is oftentimes not the case. In fact, I would argue that in most cases, it's not the case. It's really hard to achieve good results in the real world. And good intentions don't actually get you very far. And from the perspectives of the left, they just cannot accept that good intentions can lead to bad results, because this calls into question their entire value system. They're no longer the saviors. It's not just a statement of, hey, these policies don't work. No, it's an attack on their very moral core and how they identify themselves as people. So failures tend to just lead to doubling down on the same. Now, having said this, I don't believe that conservatism is a true viable option to ideologies of the left, and I will explain that in other episodes. I do believe, however, that there is an alternative. And I discuss that a lot in this channel. I believe in a progress-based perspective that focuses on promoting long-term economic growth, promoting a prosperous working class, and creating pathways so children of low-income families can enter that prosperous working class. And above all, focus relentlessly on results. Good intentions are a dime a dozen. Results are hard to achieve, and we have to constantly experiment to find out what actually works in the real world. And I believe that to make this possible, we need to reform the political system. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please don't forget to subscribe and like. It really helps the channel to grow. If you'd like more resources, I'd recommend going to my website, frompovertytoprogress.com. With a free email subscription, you get free ebook samples, free audio samples, and you can buy discounted ebooks and audiobooks. If you insist on paying full price, you can get ebooks, paperbacks, and hardcovers at Amazon, or if you're a bookstore or a library, you can get them at Ingram and Spark. Audiobooks are available at Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. If you'd like to know more about books related to this content, I'd recommend going to my other website, which is the techratchet.com. It consists of an online library of over 280 book summaries on the topics of technology, history, economic growth, and progress. And now we're getting on to the exciting part, a free book giveaway of my first book, From Poverty to Progress. If you're a regular listener, you already know the rules. If you don't know the rules, please pause this video and read this description. There's a free book giveaway every week. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time.